Hello everyone, greetings from PayTap's technical support team. In this series, you will learn how to integrate with PayTaps through our PT2 API endpoints. And we will walk you through the fourth integration type, which is the own form. For the purpose of this series, we have created a very simple Laravel project to walk you through the integration process. But feel free to follow the steps in this series with your own project, whatever the programming language or the frameworks used to integrate with PayTaps. So, let's get started. In this video, we are going to start learning about the payment workflow for the own form integration type, and also we are going to learn more about the project structure that we are going to use throughout this series. So, let's get started. The first thing you should know is that you can learn more about this part inside our PayTap support portal under the solution article called the Own Form APIs Integration Manual. Now, whenever you are navigating to step 3 over here, initiating the payment, the first thing you should know is the payment workflow part. And here, we are going to understand how the total or the overall payment workflow of the own form integration types work. So here we can see that it's a very three simple steps. So simply the first thing you, as we said earlier, that you will be making your own payment form and you will be handling your own the card details, your customers card details on your own. So simply at the first part over here, you can see that it says that your website will display its own card entry form and you will be ensuring that you capture these required details, and we will get to know about the required details in the upcoming video, which is called the required parameters. And these required details will be something like the card number, the expiry date, the security code. And when the customer completes this form, the details will be submitted to your own server. So here is the first payment workflow session, or the first payment workflow part, which is that you are going to create the form yourself, you are going to handle the required details yourself, and the required data or the payment details will be sent to your own server. So as you can see here, we have created our own payment form. It contains a simple customer details form and a simple payment details form. And here in the payment details, we just collected the card numbers, the expiry month, the expiry year, and the security code, which are the required parameters to fulfill the payment details. And we are going to learn more about the required parameter as we said in the next video. So, of course, we need to do the needed validation to make sure that each one of these fields is, related to its own validation and its own specification that you need to submit to your server before you submit to PayTap servers. So now this is the first part. As you can see, the second part is once your server receives the payment, you can see here that your server then must send a payment request to PayTap's gateway contains the customer card details. Okay, so here once you collect the details from the customer, you will directly submit it to PayTap servers, which this request we are going to talk about in the next video, but the request will contain the customer details, the payment details, which is the card number, the expiry, security code. We're going to discuss about them in the next video. But once you receive and validate these details, the next thing of the payment workflow is to submit these details. Now, the final stage, which will be or will actually depend whether your customer used a 3DS card or non 3DS card. Okay, so in the case that the card used is 3DS enrolled, as clarified here, the API response will return a redirect URL which you must navigate the cardholder to complete the payment. And in other cases, the card which is used is not a 3DS card, the payment result will be returned in the API response itself directly. Meaning, so for 3DS enrolled card, what happens is that the payment is not done directly. No, the customer will need to fulfill some sort of OTP first. So if the customer is using a 3DS card that require an OTP or something like that, so instead of finalizing the payment directly, what happens is that you will receive the required or the authentication or the 3DS page first, which you must redirect your customer to. So in the response, you will receive a URL for the OTP page that your customer will fulfill its OTP, and then they will retrieve to your website. Now, this will happen only for 3DS card. But for non-3DS card, what happens is the payment will be done immediately and you will receive the payment response in the request response that you sent to PayTabs. So let's get a look at the projects that we are going to use to implement this payment workflow. Then we can test the two cards, the 3DS card and the non-3DS card. So if we navigate to our code over here, let's start from the payment controller. So once we submit this form, of course I have here all the needed details. You can submit all the needed detail like the card, the customer details, the shipping details will be optional and we will discuss it in the optional parameter video. But now, once you receive or once you submit all the needed details from this form, you may need to submit some hidden inputs, for example, to submit a certain form type or payment type indicating that this is a known form. Okay, once you submit it, I'm going to receive it in my controller over here. So I had made a very simple controller function called initiate on, and here I will receive the request in it. And of course, you will need to do the needed validation in this request object. So I will need like to do validation on the card form, on the customer details form if I'm having a shipping details. So I need to do the needed specification or the needed validation to make sure that each field is what you are expecting to send to PayTabs. Now, coming along, the next thing will be that I'm passing this request to a payment repository that I have created to being processed. So over here, I have a payment repository, and inside it, I have a process request function. Now, what happens this process request function is very simple. I take the request, I pass it into a data wrapper that creates the object to me. Then I retrieve this object that I will be sending inside my trait, which will be sending to PayTabs over here. So first of all, let's take a look at the data wrapper, which is the main object over here that will compare or combine the request for us. So here inside the data wrapper, you will see that I have a function to generate on payload that take the request and take a generated object that I have created, and we will just see how I have created. So here I'm just generating the object from the request. So this is the object that I'm going to send to PayTabs. We are going to discuss about all its parameter in the next videos. But for now, this is the object. I'm taking some details from the request. Of course, I'm taking my configuration from my config file. So like the transaction type, the transaction class, I have configured inside a config file over here so that I will use it in all types of transactions. Back to the data wrapper over here, we can see that I have used the detail or the configuration from the config file. I have used my profile ID from the PayTabs from the environment file, and we will learn how we can get the profile ID in the upcoming videos. I have generated the cart details from the request. You may generate it from the request directly, or you may generate it from a database. Finally, you just needed to pass it into this object in order to send it to PayTabs. I have generated the card details from the request over here. Okay, generated and put it the PAN number, the CVV, expiry months and experiences. I'm using a callback and return. We will learn about that. For the customer details, for example, over here I have the customer details. I have made another built-in function over here, use it, actually created an embedded inside my payload to generate the customer details. If we navigate it out here, you will see something like generate customer details. I'm just taking a request and create a customer details object out of it. The same goes for the shipping details. Maybe if I'm using user defined parameters, we will learn about those in the future. I'm going to use an object like that. Whatever, I'm just creating this object. I am saving it in the construct of this class, and then I'm passing it to my final payload, which it generate on payload over here. Now, once this payload is ready and generated, I'm going to return the payload over here to my payment repository, and I'm going to array it to make it into array and just pass it to my send payment request trait. Now, this trait is simply made to send a request to an endpoint. So simply here I'm using the HTTP client class Okay, I'm configuring the endpoint using my configuration file over here. So I have endpoints related to each region, like whatever the region you have a related endpoint. And of course, we have a solution article dedicated to that. So let's take a look over here. If we came over here, what is my region inside PayTap support portal? What is my region endpoint URL? You will see the related URL for each region. And what I'm doing inside my configuration file is I simply am using this URL and I'm adding my endpoint with it, whether it's own, capture, whatever it is. So I'm using the own form endpoint along with the region URL for here in my region, and I'm just using this as an endpoint and I'm passing it over here. You can see the URL is ready now. I am passing it. I'm using the client HTTP. I'm sending a post request. I'm using the URL I generated as an endpoint. I am passing my API key from the environment file as an authorization. Then I pass the data body from the request that we generated inside the data wrapper. Then finally, I'm receiving the response of this request and decode it so that I return it to my payment controller. And my payment controller over here, you will see that I'm just doing simple checks to see if this is, if this is a direct response, so I have a payment response over here, or this has a redirect URL. For example, if it has a redirect URL, it means that the customer used a 3DS card that needs an OTP level or an authentication level. So I will redirect the customer to this level, then the customer will be redirected back to my website. So let's test this workflow in total out. Over here, I have a solution article called "What are the test card available?" which you can also actually get it from your merchant dashboard. So if you navigate to your merchant dashboard over here, let's sign in. If we navigate to the merchant dashboard over here and inside the developers, we have under testing a section called test cards, which will contain test card, and you will see card that is 3D enrolled and card that is not. So let's first try a not 3DS enroll to see what happened. You can get it either from your merchant dashboard or you can get it from over here. So I'm getting from this solution article. I'm going to use this non 3DS. Okay, this is a non 3DS card, mean it does not require an OTP. First, I will fulfill my customer details, of course. I'm going to come over here and fulfill just any card details. I'll just need to have the number and the security code right. And once we click on checkout, okay, I have a page expiration. I need to reload my page. I believe this has been open for a bunch of times, so now I'll have to paste it, try again, and now once I check out, you will see that the payment is done immediately. Though the customer is still inside my website, there is a transaction made. So if I go to my transaction inside the dashboard over here, I will see that I have a new transaction with the payment method type of direct card API, which represents the own form, of course. Now, this is the workflow. This is a simple workflow for the non 3DS card. Now, what happens with the 3DS card enrolled? Actually, the card that requires a sort of OTP. So we are going to test this out to see what happens. I'm going to use a 3DS enrolled card, which is this one, for example. Use it over here. Going to contain the data randomly. And now once I press on checkout, the customer will be redirected. As you can see, this is out of your server. This is a simulation for the 3DS secure simulation. Here will be the OTP level, or here your customer will be required to fill out his OTP for his own bank. And once he authenticates the customer, he will get back to your website safely and the payment will be done successfully. And this is the total workflow. This is how it will happen inside the 3DS card and with the non 3DS card. And now we can move to the next video.